We just talked about building relationships with the local teachers and parents, which kind of leads us into our next question of how do you conduct outreach and marketing and supplements to the studies of students of all ages, which you just spoke about sending teachers the information to get the students acquainted
Right.
to the museum and to the house and to the history.
We do maintain a website. Laurie is the website guru. She keeps up with all of that and helps to prepare them in advance by sending materials. We have a Facebook presence here in the local area. We also communicate closely with our local visitors bureau, which provides us with brochures based upon information that we provide to them to give out to various members of the public who come to visit here. We also have a page on Visit Alamance, which is run through the Visitors Bureau here in the local area, and all of our events and so forth are advertised on that Visit Alamance page. We have, as I said, brochures that are handed out. We do programs of largely national significance. We bring in a number of national speakers every year. These programs are held off-site, generally at Elon University, sometimes at the local Alamance Country Club, and lots of different topics, everything from, say, Charles Dickens. We just did a program on Charles Dickens with a descendant of the Dickens family, and so forth. So it just varies. Excuse me. It varies from time to time. We also do lecture dinners. These involve taking a particular object from the museum collection, talking about the object and where it came from, what it is, how it was used, and then the history that's related to the object in general. We do tours all over the country, and we have been taking groups as far north as New York and the Hudson River Valley, as far south as New Orleans, and of course to Charleston, Williamsburg, typical places like that. These are largely guided tours, excuse me. And they're several day tours generally. We also do architectural tours to various locations. For instance, we just recently did a tour to Warren County, North Carolina, to look at historic architecture in that area. We have publications that the museum produces. Excuse me, I have written several books about the history of the local area, and those have been published by the museum. There is what's called Shuttle and Plow, which is an academic history of the local area that Dr. Carol Troxler from Elon University and myself wrote. And then we also have a biographical history of the local area, which I produced, and we publish facsimile copies of the historic history of Alamance, originally published in 1900 by Sally Walker Stockard, who was the first woman to go to graduate school from Alamance County.
Interesting. I've lived in this county my whole life, and a lot of this I'm just learning for the first time. Staying on the educational part, how can the museum exhibit enhance the informal education experience of students? Like now, we've pretty much, like with your college kids, so to say, a lot of them are now online students where they don't physically go to a campus. So how does the museum incorporate this new type of learning or this online learning?
You are able to go online and to pull up items from our collection. You get a photograph of the object. You get a brief history of what the object is and how it was used. There is also a history page on the website which deals with the history of the individuals who lived in this house and why they were important and that sort of thing. We also, if you come to the site, the exhibits themselves basically teach about various things, including things like the Industrial Revolution, labor relations, the antebellum period, slavery, that kind of thing.
How does your exhibit help the community members relate to the past?
Photos, publications, the antique rooms themselves, the experience of being in the antique rooms, the discussion of what's in the rooms, all of that provides a learning experience, I think.
Staying within the community, how has the social economic status of this area influenced the exhibits in the museum?
I think that we do address the fact of the coming of the Industrial Revolution here and how that, beginning in the late 1800s and through the early 1900s, basically affected the demography of the area. It affected the socioeconomic situation here in the county. It affected the demography of Alamance County with the placement of all these little villages which had to be placed where there was a mill, basically, and so forth. So the pictures that we have in the exhibits and so forth help to describe all of that.
What is the process of developing a connection with your external partners?
We use external partners to sponsor a lot of our events, and we do try to maintain relationships with a number of local businesses who help us out in that way. Excuse me, I'm having a voice problem here. We have connection with our local school teachers and with the county commissioners. We maintain relationships with civic groups here in the area who both come to tour as well as we provide them oftentimes with programs of various sorts. We also prepare a budget for the county each year. We have to go before the county commissioners to present this budget, and that's how they determine some of our funding from year to year.
Speaking of funding, which leads into our next question, what methods does the museum use to acquire sponsorship or funds to actively run the museum on a daily basis?
Yeah, we have a membership arm. People pay a yearly membership. There are various levels of membership. They receive a notice on their anniversary date of their first membership so that we, keep them involved on a year-to-year basis. As I said, we're funded somewhat by the county commissioners. We do prepare, as I said, a budget for the county commissioners, and we have to present a detailed report, which is usually about 30 pages of things that we have, sponsored or done during the course of the year to give them some idea of how their funds have been expended. We go through a budget process with them. So we also maintain, at all of these events, we try to encourage membership, and we take membership cards to all of the events that we do. Currently, there are probably about 300 sponsors, I would say, in the local area that basically provide funding of one sort or another to the museum.
Moving on from funds and sponsorships, Does the museum collect visitor feedback?
We collect it to the extent that, visitors are encouraged to go on our website and, make comments and that sort of thing. Years ago, we used to provide a printed page with questions that was, handed out to all of our visitors, and they were given a stamped, self-addressed envelope to return it with responses. We found that that was pretty ineffective. We wasted more money, providing them with stamps than we got in terms of real responses. So, we don't do that any longer, but we do encourage people to, go to the website afterwards and give us some response.
Um, the feedback you receive from your visitors, how does it impact the exhibits, and how do you use that feedback to improve the exhibits?
Well, I can give you a couple of examples. We've had some visitors in the past who come and maybe they see, a photograph of a group of mill workers, and we just have them labeled as mill workers from such and such date without names. And somebody will say, well, that's my grandfather in this picture, and I know a lot of these other people, or I can tell you who a lot of these other people are. So we will then be told those names, and we go back and change the label, to reflect that and to provide that greater, amount of information. Oftentimes visitors come through and they will, see something that reminds them of something that they have at home, or that they, would like for us to have more information about. So we encourage them to provide that information to the museum so that we may incorporate it into our files as well.
Speaking of that, that kinda is like the new technology or the new term used called crowdsourcing. So how do you feel about the museum using that type of, where everybody can just input if they have knowledge of something?
I think it's good, but it has to be restricted to some extent. We do encourage people certainly to voice their opinions and so forth, but I think there has to be some filtering of that at times as well.
Staying on visitor participation, how does the museum encourage visitor participation? For example, like filming content for visitor social media pages, or if they're content creators?
Yeah, we do not allow generally any filming within the context of the museum. And one of the reasons why is that, as you can see, most of the objects are not under glass. They're easily picked up if somebody wanted to do that, and so forth. And so we honestly don't encourage or don't allow any, photographic work or filming inside the house itself. And where we do allow filming is when we do special demonstrations or events, things like, maybe we do, an event out in the summer kitchen in which there is, period cooking demonstration. We allow people to film those kinds of things. Or we have quilters, or we have, somebody out here shoeing horses, and we allow filming in those kinds of contexts, but not with inside the, house museum itself.
How does the museum store or house any artifacts that you may not have on display, like in the room we're in today?
You probably saw when you drove up that we were restoring this building across the way. And typically that building houses our, archival collection that is not on display. All of that had to be removed during, the construction process, which is ongoing. That, by the way, is a period outbuilding. It is a granary building that was originally, built in the 1870s by a man by the name of John, or two men by the name of John and Emsley Coble. They were local vernacular builders, and it's a great example of Germanic vernacular building construction. And so we're trying to restore the building, keeping up with that original type of construction. But the interior has been adaptively reused, and we have climate control and so forth over there, to, store things.
How does the museum acquire the artifacts that are on display? Do you have them on loan by other museums? Are they gifted? Or just like descendants decide to clean out their closet and they find something and they bring it to you?
Some of all of that. Mainly, we have done a good job of trying to keep up with the descendants of the family. There are about 2,100 living descendants scattered all over the United States as well as several foreign countries. And they have been very good and very generous to return many original items to the house, so that now we have about 65% of the collection that's on display in the house actually belong to the whole family. And it's great because we can tell nice stories about the items that are here, and they help us to flesh out the house, so to speak. In addition to that, local citizens, and we have probably about 450, I think we're up to about that number now. Private citizens here in the community have given objects of one sort or another to the museum at times, and some of that is kept in storage but brought out when we do special exhibits or have special needs. For instance, we probably have about 120 antique quilts here that were produced in this area from the late 1700s through the early 1900s. And so periodically we will do a quilt exhibit, let's say, and we can pull from that collection to flesh out the exhibit itself. So it's, in that way that we do acquire things. Nothing that we have is on loan. We do not allow long-term loans here. The only very rare instance where we might take a loan is if we do get a loan from another institution for a short-term exhibit, but all that's specified within the paperwork as to how long it can stay and that sort of thing. Everything that we have is accessioned by the museum, and there's a special technique for applying the accession numbers and things to objects, and the way those numbers are read is also pretty much standard practice in terms of museum studies, the way things are numbered. All that is computerized, and so it allows us to go not only to the computer and go find something by its number, but we can press in like antique quilt and it'll pull up all the antique quilts that we have and their numbers and so forth. So the computer has been a great way of keeping track of all that stuff.
It's much better than doing it by hand like in the old days.
In the old days, exactly.
And then you have to go pull boxes. My last question is, how does the Alamance County Historical Museum measure the success of its exhibits, and what is the criteria you use to consider when you do your analysis?
I would say that the very fact that we have a lot of repeat visitors, even from the local area, speaks to the fact that somebody must be getting something out of their visits here. I think that house museums do have a very special place in the museum world because they do allow people to come in and to see a certain ambiance within a particular location. And but then also in a house museum, you're sort of you have to be telling the truth, so to speak. People want to think that they're seeing the real object and that it's being used in the way that it really was used and so forth. So there's a cautionary there for a lot of museum professionals that are dealing with house museums, and that the truth factor, I think, is a very important thing. And we try to provide the objects within a context in which they can be understood and can also broaden a person's understanding of, say, the socioeconomic conditions of the time and why something came to be the way it was, and so forth. So
this was not one of the questions I
Sure.
sent you, but I just am curious, would you prefer working in a house museum or somewhere like like the Smithsonian or some big type of museum like the Met Gala or something? Which one would you prefer?
Um, I started out my career working in a big museum setting. As I said, worked for the Museo Nacional in Rio de Janeiro, which is the national museum. That museum is, or was, housed in a very historic old building that had been built as a residential palace by Dom Pedro, who was the emperor of Brazil. He had fled Portugal during an uprising, and his entire retinue fled to Rio, and he constructed the royal palace there. Eventually, after the subsequent revolution in Brazil, the palace was turned into the National Museum. And I was working there primarily as a field anthropologist. So although I had an office at the museum with my name on the door and so forth, I was virtually never there because I was always out in the field collecting items from that. And you may know that the National Museum burned to the ground back in 2018, I think it was. So most of all of those collections are now lost to us because I think they lost about over 85% of their entire collection there, which was a great shame. Plus the loss of the building itself, which was a wonderful old historic building in and of itself. So I have had some experience working in a national big museum setting. This has suited my purposes to some extent for the last 25 or so years because I also was trained as a professor, and so it has allowed me to teach at the same time that I can work out here. There are a lot of challenges working in a house museum. It's kind of like you've got to always have your house. It's like if you were showing your house off every day. There's also a challenge in working in a house museum because of the collections that you house. For instance, do we let people walk on these antique carpets? How do we treat textiles in an environment where not necessarily do you always have good climate control all the time? All of those factors filter in. How much protection can you provide for objects that are in your collection in this kind of setting? So house museums present unique challenges, I think, that a lot of other museums don't have. Of course, all types of museums have their own challenges, but I think house museums have unique challenges. So it has allowed me to experience, to some extent, both worlds, if you will, and I would say that I enjoy the situation out here. I probably never would have stayed here as long as I stayed had there not been other circumstances that were involved in the time as well. But when I was hired, I told the county commissioners that I would give it about a year and they could look for somebody else in that year's time. And then I was intending to go back to my work in South America, but that ultimately changed. And so 1 year led to another, and here 30 years later, I'm still sitting here. So you never know how things like that will work out. It has allowed me to learn a lot of local history that I did not know, even though I grew up here in the local area. A lot of this history I was not fully aware of until I started working out here. This position has allowed me to write a lot, so I've been able to publish several books at the same time that I was working here, although most of those publications were on topics related to the local history. I did produce, after I came here, 2 books on masking traditions in the Upper Amazon and so forth, which was based on my previous research. But again, this job has allowed me to do that kind of thing as well. So I have learned a lot of local history that I didn't know, and I think all of them provide different kinds of learning experiences, so to speak.
Should I call you Mr. Vincent or Dr. Vincent? Cause well, I wanna thank you for your time today.
Appreciate it.
You really did enlighten me, like, I'm like you, living in this area, I was born here, raised here, and there was a lot of history I didn't know until I started my graduate program, and then having to do, you know, projects with local museums and historical sites in the area. So, yeah, I'm like you, I've learned a lot, and I was like, I did not know this little rinky-dink county had all this history. So I wanna thank you for your time, thank you for allowing us to
Sorry
film
about
in
my
this
throat situation here.
in this wonderful room.